Well, this week in our Bible study on faithful rebels, we will be looking into the book of Daniel for the next 2 weeks. And specifically, this Thursday, we'll be looking at the story of Daniel and his faithful witness to the God of Israel. Now, one thing you need to know about the first 6 chapters of the book of Daniel is it's often known as a court story. And we've seen these before in the biblical narrative, especially in the Old Testament. If you know the story of Esther, that's another court story as well. The story of Joseph is also a court story. So, of a faithful person who shows their faith and all these enemies and jealousy and people trying to take down people, and usually set in, of course, like a court, like a kingdom as well. So, Daniel is one of those stories. So, where we begin in the book of Daniel is we find out that in the 3rd year of the reign of King Jehoiakim, that he has been overtaken by the Babylonians, and specifically King Nebuchadnezzar. So Judah has been taken over, the area has been pillaged, the Israelites now are in exile and taken captive by the Babylonians. Along with that, a lot of the things that were in the house of God, things that were, precious, were brought to the treasury of their own gods as well. And specifically, we're focusing on the god of Marduk when we're talking about the Babylonians. Now, when the king did this, when the king brought the Israelites captives, he decided that he wanted some in his court. He wanted some of them to assimilate, but he wanted specific people to be brought in. He wanted people who had wisdom and knowledge, were good looking, without blemish. And he wanted to assimilate them in the court, give them a chance to learn the literature, the language of the Chaldeans, so that they can serve in that way. Now that there were all these Israelites, they needed some Israelites to be in positions in the court to assist. And Daniel, along with his friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, were the friends that were brought in to do just that. But coming into a new culture, what happens is that if you are the Israelites who worship the one true God, you worship Adonai Elohim, the Lord God, and you're coming into a Babylonian territory, that's not going to fly because they will want you to worship their gods. And names in Hebrew were very much tied to kind of the holiness of the name of God, or a tying to the God of Israel. Even in Daniel's name, you can see the L at the end. Was L is a Hebrew word for God, referencing the Lord God Almighty. So what they did in that assimilation is they were given new names, and in these new names, they had reference to the pagan gods. And it seemed at first that Daniel and his friends put up with at least that. But then there was a situation where they were now in this kingdom and they were now being fed all this food in the kingdom that was not meeting any of their dietary laws. And that was the sticking point for Daniel, is that he wanted to remain faithful. He was in this situation where I think Daniel had to figure out what he was going to push against. And this was one he certainly didn't want to do. In Leviticus, specifically Leviticus 11, there are dietary laws for Jewish people, like what to eat, what not to eat, what's considered clean and not clean. And so Daniel asked for this substitute for them. And the person who is bringing this food is saying, I'm really nervous about doing this because if you look different than everybody else and you're requesting me to bring you vegetables and all these clean foods that you want or considered clean by your standard, it will be my death upon me. And Daniel says, let's put a test to this, that in 10 days' time, let's see what happens. And 10 days was typically a time of like a spiritual test to see what the result will be. And it ended up that Daniel was in a position where at the end of those 10 days, they were, you know, they looked completely fine. There was no suspicion around that. But in that, in the men that upheld those standards, even in the time that they were, living in where they were really being pushed in, assimilated into a different environment, they remained faithful to God. And God recognized that. And it says that God gave wisdom and knowledge and skill to every aspect. Um, and then also, because of that faithfulness, Daniel was then given the ability to have visions and dreams. Visions we see later in the book that have a lot more apocalyptic symbolism in him that is later chapters after chapter 6. But it's kind of, as we talk about that court story, like Joseph, right? Joseph also had the ability to interpret dreams, and that opened even a wider door for Daniel as well in the kingdom to be able to interpret the king's dreams, just like Joseph, they were able to be in these secure positions because of their faithfulness. Well, looking ahead, jumping ahead in Daniel's story, there are some good things in there, but you'll have to wait until next week for that story. Um, but in chapter 6, we've had a few kings that have come and gone at this point, and now King Darius has come to reign. And the people in the court are very jealous of Daniel. Again, similar to Joseph as well, people trying to plot against the faithful person. And so they try to coerce King Darius into um, having this ordinance that if you worship any other god than the king, that you can be put to death. And now Daniel at this point is praying. He's praying to the Lord God. He's practicing this. He's gotten to this point where he's been able to pray to the Lord God because the other king, Nebuchadnezzar especially, recognized the Lord God. Um, so, he was in this position where he was able to do this, and these people were trying to plot against him. And so, of course, they throw him into the lion's den, thinking that that will do away with them. But the test in that is seeing that actually the God who Daniel worships saves him from the lion's den. And this changes King Darius as well. And King Darius says that this is the living God, the enduring forever. His kingdom shall never be destroyed, and his dominion have no end. He delivers and rescues. He works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth. He has saved Daniel from the power of the lions. So this Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. So when I think about Daniel as this faithful rebel, this is very different from Elijah, who we saw last week. Elijah, who was a lot more kind of in your face a bit, kind of just really said it like it was. Daniel seemed to have this more diplomatic approach of talking to people, of finding ways to be who he was, to remain in his Israelite identity, his practices, honoring God in that. But also, we see in Daniel too that he is bound to a conscience of not just bowing down to the gods or kings in the area that he is, but he's bound in conscience to the God of Israel who has sustained him on this journey. And I think that his own faithful rebel in his faithful rebel attitude in that faithfulness to God we see in these stories also changes people as well. So I hope you can join us on Thursday as we dive into this story a little deeper and explore further what does it mean to be a faithful rebel in the biblical story. Take care.